Hello and happy Tuesday. I'm Daniel, he's Mick, and we are back for another episode of Six Rotations, brought to you as always by SNA Sports, better equipment for a better game. Mick, one of our favorite stretches of the season. We're here in mid-November. It's RPI talk, it's bracketology watch, and of course, the conferences will be decided here in the next few weeks. We've got great matchups coming up this week, some highly anticipated duels in the Big East, the West Coast Conference. As always, the ACC and Big Ten is in flux. So let's start there. Sunday, one of our best matches of the season, at least anticipation-wise, and Ohio State came up clutch, taking down Nebraska, sticking to that first place spot, tied with Wisconsin. Ohio State won it in 4. Louisville reverse sweep against Georgia Tech to keep their ACC championship hopes alive. Mick, these are the two top matches of the weekend. What were your thoughts watching them?
Well, Londot came to play for Ohio State. I think 12 kills in the first set, 17 total by the end of the second set. Could have been a 3-0 sweep. Ohio State lost their focus at the end of set 3. Nice comeback by Nebraska. But interesting that Coach Cook is still moving his setters around. He just doesn't look like he feels comfortable with what's going on there. And I'm worried that when you start messing with your setters in November, you have trouble. I've seen it with a couple of other teams that we've talked about that have had trouble with their setters, where they start worrying about their setters late and the setters lose their confidence. And so better keep our eye on Nebraska right now. See if he can reverse that and get those guys feeling good. Interesting with Georgia Tech and Louisville. Georgia Tech comes out and Bergman just goes off. First two sets just goes off. Georgia Tech gets up 2-0. Then Louisville comes back. Then a 30-minute delay to wipe up the floor because it's so hot in there.
Crazy.
That's like turning out the lights in Mexico City. I mean, I've had that happen. I can't tell you another number of times internationally. We get up 2-0, the lights go out, 30 minutes later, it's a whole new team we're playing. And then you've got to fight for your life. Well, what happened was Louisville came back, Chauncey just goes off. And but the strangest thing for me is the other left side, who's supposed to have DeBeer, who's supposed to have an arm problem. She brings 3 back row attacks.
For only 3 kills of the whole match.
Vicious back row swings and just destroys the ball. And yet she can't swing. I'm not sure what's going on there, but wow, if she is healthy and swinging in the front row with Chauncey, they're a team to deal with.
Well, that's not a surprise, right? We knew what Louisville was. We know they were the #1 seed last season. They're the team to beat in the ACC. Pitt, of course, took him down earlier. Chauncey goes 27-8-60, hitting over 300 with 10 digs to pull off the reverse sweep. And I will tell you what, how many volleyball fans out there were like me on Sunday, just expecting Nebraska to do the same when they came back to win the third set in extra points. But you have to give a lot of credit to the nation's darling, right? Media's favorite, Ohio State. They go on that 12-3 run in the 4th set. Nebraska, they did have a very cool setup on Friday. Their 300th straight sellout in Devaney against Iowa, a 3-set win. But of course, now they fall out of the graces of the top 3 and 4 in the coaches poll. Let's take a look at that now. Our top 10 for the AVCA coaches. 1, 2, 3 stay the same, with Louisville and Ohio State jumping up 1 notch. Then Nebraska stays in front of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh against Louisville Friday night. Buckle in. It's going to be a fantastic rematch down in Kentucky. And then Stanford, Minnesota, and Florida. Florida and Stanford riding some nice winning streaks here into this final stretch. Florida gets Kentucky twice to decide the SEC. Stanford has all but clinched the Pac-12. USC looked a little testy. They almost lost to an unwinnable or unwinned. How do you even say that? Cal, who has not won a Pac-12 game in a few years. Mick, we're going to do a little bit of RPI talk in this episode. I might put on my bracketology hat for a little bit here at the end of November. We know how poorly that went last year with me getting all those Big 12 teams wrong. But who will be the Big 12 this year? We're not sure. There was a huge shakeup in the Big 12, though, Mick, and that was Baylor falling to TCU, which really takes a lot of the excitement out of this weekend's Baylor-Texas matchup. And for Texas, they've got a matchup Wednesday with a Kansas team that is all but in the tournament. Yes, Kansas, again, from the Crawford run last year, they're sitting at an RPI of remarkably 24 right now, despite what has been a middling season in the Big 12 for them. Kansas, Texas on Wednesday. Do you think the Jayhawks stand a chance?
No, I don't. I don't. I don't know how they could have lost to Oklahoma. I don't know how they could beat Texas. They get up every so often. They play at a very high level, but they can't seem to sustain it. And it doesn't seem like that they play all of their good competition as big matches. They lose sometimes 3-0 when I think they should be in those matches. So I'm not a big Kansas fan right now, just simply by the way they played this whole season, up and down and around,
Well, there's no denying Kansas, Iowa State, Baylor, Texas. They're all in. They're all in the top 30 right now. And the RPIs are probably only going to get better for teams like Kansas who will play Texas. But TCU is an interesting one. They're 40th in the RPI. Last season, all those Big 12 teams made the tournament in the 40s. West Virginia was 43, Kansas State 47, Iowa State 48. And don't forget that Ole Miss snuck in at the 54th RPI. So any of you teams sitting there in the late 40s, holding on for hope, Utah 41, LSU 42, Pepperdine, Tennessee, Georgia, Northwestern, they're all kind of staying in the conversation here. We saw that the committee last year didn't quite credit the RPI as much as maybe the eye test. And so for Jason Williams beating his former coach in Ryan McGuire, of course, Williams spent all that time with Baylor, comes over to TCU and beats Texas Tech on Saturday, takes a week off, beats Baylor this past Saturday. They're going to finish with a middling schedule that won't help the RPI. West Virginia, Kansas State, Oklahoma, all of them in the hundreds in RPI. So I'm not quite sure if TCU has what it takes in terms of RPI, but we've seen that doesn't necessarily matter. Let's talk one more big one here this weekend before we move in to a few more. And Mick, that was Western Kentucky against Rice. Thursday night, it lived up to the hype. Western Kentucky wins their 5th straight against the Owls, 16-14 in the 5th set. Ooh, you got to go back to 2018, the last time Rice won, but they'll have redemption again in a few weeks in the Conference USA final. Did you catch any of this match between the Toppers and the Owls?
I did not see it. I watched the stats as it was going on. It was amazing the way they went back and forth. And of course, Western Kentucky is bringing it with one player, and we've had her on the show, and she didn't disappoint. I think like 37 kills, something like that. So she was really, really good. But Rice, a little bit more disciplined, spread it out a little bit, stayed in the match as they have been. But boy, do you think Western Kentucky can come back in this tournament and do this again against Rice? Because they're both going to get to the finals again.
You know what? It doesn't quite matter to me. Maybe they can, maybe they won't. Either way, I think Western Kentucky hasn't put themselves in a spot to host. They did the whole thing at Diddle. They had all that fun, but the committee seems to keep them at bay. It feels like Western's RPI is 25. Rice, though, on the other hand, they could play themselves into a seeding spot in the same kind of feel-good moment. They're 17 in RPI. So I will say that Rice probably has a little bit more to play for. And of course, all of those recent CUSA championships for Western against Rice. How about Lauren Matthews' line? I'm going to give this to you. For the middle blocker that we chatted to a couple months ago that loves her bacon and pancakes, 30 kills on 61 swings with 13 blocks, 7 attack errors to hit 377. Paige Briggs, who is the very spry outside hitter, 12-6, 51 for her with 19 digs. I'm not sure if this Western Kentucky team can compete with some of the Power 5 conferences this season, but they surely can hold their head up in the Conference USA saying, hey, we did it. We held our own in the regular season. They did get stomped by Louisville earlier in the year in that very emotional game. But if they stay out of the region, maybe they'll have a chance in the opening weekend. Mick, there's that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think Western Kentucky relies so much on Matthews. 37 points in that match.
Crazy.
As you said, 30 kills. Well, 30 kills in 5 games, figured out. That's 6 kills a game plus her blocks. Yeah, and her blocks add up to more points there. She gives up maybe 7 points attacking. So she's plus 30, plus 29 for the match. But you load up in the middle, 3 blockers, take her out every time. Do they have enough firepower to beat anybody of substance after that? Rice may be more balanced and have a better chance if they could get by Matthews, you know.
So remember, Rice was 21, Western was 22. Let's look at the rest of the top 25 this week for the coaches. Western jumps up to 20, sitting right behind their neighbors in Purdue. And there's a lot of familial relations there between Purdue and Western Kentucky. They're constantly battling for recruits. Might that be a fun weekend if you throw Purdue and Western into the same region in the first round? And of course, the two of them nearly battled in the Elite Eight a few seasons ago when Kentucky, who was 18, edged out Western, then Rice 22. How about Oregon? They jump all the way to 12, had a crazy reverse sweep on Thursday against Colorado. The Boilermakers fell to Penn State and Ohio State at home this past weekend, so that drops them down to 19. BYU has a big weekend, Mick. Let's talk West Coast Conference here. They're sitting 17th. Loyola Marymount is trying to battle their way, LMU, right into the tournament. At the moment, the LMU team is 37th in RPI. They've got the big chance this weekend, taking on BYU on Saturday, USD on Thursday. Of course, BYU goes to Pepperdine, USD goes to Pepperdine. All 4 of those matches will be massive for this stretch at the end of the year.
Yeah, Pepperdine is on the downswing. LMU is on the upswing. BYU, we don't know where they are. And San Diego continues to go 3-0, 3-0, 3-0, 3-0, 3-0.
Everyone. They're beating everyone.
And they're just bing, bing, bing. The team that's in the free fall, though, besides this conference, is Washington. They lost Arizona this weekend. They're down to 37 in the RPI, and they keep going down.
And they barely beat Arizona State in 5 sets. And Washington, they're sitting at 21. That's a situation where the coaches just don't know what to do with them. It's kind of tough. I'd almost feel, and I know Coach Cook, like he'd rather them be unranked. Put a little bit more fire in that clubhouse. Get their team fired up with something like that. He did text me a week ago saying, we're not too worried. We're a December team. So I think, Mick, we're at that part of the year where some of these teams that cannot win the tournament, they cannot win the regular seasons for conferences, but they think they're in the tournament. They could kind of start to gear towards those first 2 rounds. Washington is a team that I feel like might be starting to do something like that. Kentucky as well. You feel like maybe a team like Oregon, who continues to battle for top 16. Those are teams in very different spots. Kentucky, I don't think has a chance to host. How fun would it be? How fun would it be, Mick? Let's put our hypothetical hats on. Where can we get? There's all these teams in that same region, right? Kentucky, Purdue, Western Kentucky. Where are they going, right? It's going to be fun. Next week, maybe we could play a little bit more bracketology when the top 16 could be a little bit clearer. But I don't know where you're going to put those kind of teams. I guess Kentucky right now is 10th in RPI. If they beat Florida, they'll probably play their way into the top 16. But do they deserve it? I'm not sure.
No, and we pointed out Kentucky only has one really significant win, I believe, in all of that schedule. What they have done, though, is they've taken care of business with everybody they should have beaten. They have beaten, with the exception of, we thought, they got hammered by Marquette early. I think it was Marquette that they lost to first or second match of the season. Well, look what Marquette's done. They've only lost 2 matches all year, I think. They're playing like that shouldn't have been an upset. That was what they were supposed to be doing.
I love this, Mick. You and I seem to be on the same page because I'm right about ready to transfer us to the big matchup on Saturday in Wisconsin. Marquette's going to host Creighton. That's 13 and 14 in the RPI. Creighton had the crazy 5-set win at home against them last time around. They'll rematch on Saturday. Listen to this Saturday slate, folks. get buckled in because we've got Pittsburgh, Louisville on Friday, Marquette-Creighton, Baylor, Texas, San Diego, Pepperdine, Kentucky, Florida, Wisconsin, Penn State, BYU, LMU. These are all matches that have huge ramifications, which means that next week's episode, we're going to know a lot in terms of what is going to be final. The thing that we won't know, though, is where the Big Ten is going to stand, because the Big Ten standings right now look so up in the air. You've got Wisconsin, Ohio State, both 15-1, Nebraska 14-2. And of course, Wisconsin will play Ohio State and Nebraska the final weekend of the season. So pretty much all of the conferences, except for that one, could be decided when we talk here next week. Where are you sitting in terms of some of those matches on Saturday?
Well, I'm sitting in a seat that says this is the greatest spectator volleyball season ever in the history of women's volleyball. There hasn't been a week, I don't think, not 1 week where there hasn't been at least one match that you just absolutely wanted to get in front of the TV and watch, or get down to the gym and see. But boy, there are a bunch this weekend. This is almost like the playoffs. And
Yeah,
the funny thing is, the thing that really is going to skew things is the Big Ten is so familiar with each other that all these matches are probably going to be close. And we're going to think all these teams are really arm and a leg above everybody else, when it's more about familiarity in my mind. I've watched them play out of their conference, and it's a little shaky sometimes.
Remember, that's preseason, though, right?
No, well, yeah, maybe, but
what happens at the end of the year usually? Is it usually 2 or 3 Big Ten teams in the Final Four?
No,
okay.
Not 2 or 3. 2 sometimes.
2, yeah.
If they get 3, they're feeling really good about themselves. But right now, I've got 4 Big Ten teams in the top 10, and I've got them there not because of their. I just think they're that good. So I think you could have, depending on how they get put in the brackets, you could have a lot of situations. Now, Texas would have to draw somebody, that would knock them off, and you've got Louisville that's going to draw somebody. I mean, they all got to play somebody good. So these matches are going to be exceptionally fun to watch, and we can speculate all we want, but it's going to come down to I'm just watching the coaches. The coaches are giving away a lot right now. If you watch what they're doing and how they react, there were some spontaneous explosions this weekend in that Ohio State match. And
there were
a lot of sly grins from the Ohio State coach. She was doing everything she could to say, hey, just stay focused, be calm, stay with it. Nebraska made a run there in the third set. I really thought that was pretty classy of them to keep their cool and stay right after it.
Well, it was impressive that Ohio State came back down 24-22 in that set just to force the extra points. And then, of course, that pancake call that erupted Mount Cook. He was right about it. And
I'm good at lip reading. That was way fun.
But, of course, Ohio State flexed there at the end, which should answer the question, at least for the time being, of whether Ohio State or Nebraska deserves that 4th spot. But could Wisconsin find their way in there? Because we know, and I feel confident in saying, that Stanford deserves to host a regional. Stanford swept UCLA, their 14th straight win of the year. They had the big reverse sweep against USC, of course, without Skylar Fields. But the Cardinal are 3rd in RPI. Ohio State is 4, and then Pittsburgh, Wisconsin, Nebraska. Unless either Wisconsin or Pittsburgh win out, I'm happy with where the 4 are for the RPI, which is Texas, Louisville, Stanford, Ohio State, and of course Louisville, Pitt, and of course Ohio State, Wisconsin will change those. Ohio State, Nebraska too. But do you think there are any teams besides these 7 that deserve a chance at the top 4?
No, I don't think they deserve a chance. I think you and I both have San Diego as a 5, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know if I have them as 4 anymore, unless craziness ensues and everyone beats each other.
But I could look at Pitt. Seriously, they dismantled Louisville the second time around, and they don't lose going into this. Why not Pitt?
No, I agree. They're switching. They're going to swap with Louisville in my mind. Louisville doesn't deserve a top 4 if you lose both to Pitt and you barely survive Georgia Tech in 5, a team that has not looked as strong as other Georgia Tech teams in the past. Lastly, though, I do want to wrap things up here with a fun little segment that we wanted to talk about, which are bid stealers, because we're getting into that part of the year where teams that are sitting in the 40s in RPI may be looking, right? If you're a Michigan fan, are you a Georgia fan? Are you a Northwestern fan? Who do you want to root for here at the back end of the group of five or the minor teams conferences wrap-ups? Well, these are the ones that stand out to us, Mick. And for you, you love the Sun Belt. James Madison just secured their first undefeated season in their first year as a Sun Belt team, 12-0. They're 29th in RPI. Yale is 32. Those are the two best RPI teams that might lose in their conference tournaments. Who else might you see as a bid stealer here in the middle of the RPI?
Oh, bid stealer. Well,
Bid
there's
stealer,
there's
right? We've got Towson has hovered
Yeah,
around the Colonial. They're currently
absolutely.
tied.
One
Towson
loss.
beat Hofstra. So both of them are 14-1. So that could come down to the conference tournament. Hawaii is 35. They own a 1-game lead over UC Santa Barbara. Hawaii still has to play Cal Poly and Santa Barbara again. So that could be an interesting one to keep an eye on, because the Rainbow Wahine are probably in even with a loss if they lose the conference. Is there another one? Let's see. I'm not sure if...
Well, here, I'll throw a real dark horse at you, South Dakota. They're
Interesting.
26-2.
Yeah, but they're 50 in RPI.
And they're ranked 50. And we showed that last year we had a 52 get in, even though there were some 41s, 42s, and 43s that did not get in.
We did.
So they probably win their conference, though.
Yeah,
that's probably.
I'm not sure if they lose it. I don't think they're in. They had a very bad pre-conference slate. They played against teams that they could have beaten and proved themselves, but they got swept by everyone. I'll throw one more in there, and that is the Mountain West Conference. UNLV. They have been so solid the last few years, but that's because they win their conference tournament. This year, if someone else wins the Mountain West, UNLV's in. They're 22 in RPI. So that's a conference that you've got to keep an eye on. Ivy, Sun Belt, Mountain West are the three main conferences that I think that all of the teams that need to hope that all 32 at-larges are not swiped away by one of these conferences where the champion loses and still gets in. So those are going to be things we keep an eye on.
And Tom Hilbert's last season at Colorado State, are they going to play for him? That puts UNLV into a real cracker box there. So it's pretty interesting to see what happens in that Mountain West Conference.
Certainly adds emotion, certainly adds intrigue. We are excited to check out all of the action with you. Enjoy this quick little episode, because I'm telling you what, next week and the following week, I think Mick and I are going to be here for a while, breaking down all of the hypotheticals, all of the conference tournaments that we're going to start getting here in a week and a half. Cannot wait for it. We've got a great week ahead. Starts Wednesday with Kansas, Texas, rolls into Thursday with a big West Coast Conference slate, and then the Friday, Saturday, Sunday fun begins. Check in on Twitter, 6 Rotations. We will be posting all of the big matches this upcoming week. For Mick, I'm Daniel. This is 6 Rotations.